Alright guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be aquascaping this 10-gallon tank. So first, I'm going to start out with some filter foam. It's just a sheet that I bought off Amazon. It's pretty poor, so what we're going to do is we're going to lay it down in the bottom of the tank. And I'm going to cut it to size. So I'm going to lay it in there just to get the rough shape of the tank. And I only want one layer for my application. You can always do more if you want. I think I end up using it more in the back to build it up to get that slope effect, but I'm just going to use my hand and make sure it's all pushed down in the corners, and I'm going to pinch where the seam is so that way I know where I need to cut it. I'm going to go grab some scissors and cut that off. So the idea of filter foam is just to let the water just flow through the filter. Since we won't actually be using a filter, we'll be using a water pump. This acts as like a sponge filter, obviously in a different way than a normal sponge filter would work, but this is a similar idea. So now that I got it cut to size, I'm going to put it in there. I'm actually going to leave the back propped up like that because it's fine. It makes it easier, less gravel and rock that I have to put in later. So this is the pump that I was talking about. This is going to suck water up for the waterfall effect that I want. I'm just going to place it in there and outline in my foam where I need to cut, so that way the pump will sit on the bottom and the water will draw through the very bottom of the tank rather than have it the bottom inch or so be still water. This is just going to give me a better, cleaner tank without sitting water. So I measured about how high I want my tube and cut it off just so it's not in the way, and then I pulled off the tube. As you can see, I made a little nick where the pump was, and that way I can pull it out and see that nick and make a better cut when it's not in the tank, when it's not quite so awkward. I'm going to just cut a very little amount off. I know this isn't going to be the right size to the filter, but the idea here is just to cut multiple times and get the nice snug fit rather than just getting it too big and it's not going to fit properly. So I remeasure, cut off just the right amount that I need to on the second time. Again, it's not, you don't want to cut off too much. You would rather have it be a nice snug fit rather than a loose fit. You can see it fits in there real nice. So I put the filter foam back in there. I'm gonna put my pump back in there, and then it has suction cups on the bottom, so I push it down so the suction is cupped to the glass on the bottom. This just helps it from moving when it vibrates and whatnot. So I'm actually going to take some leftover filter foam and I'm going to put it on top, so that way all the water has to go through a filter. And the idea of the filter foam before it goes into the vacuum is that if you have any big gunk in your tank, like leaves, plants, rocks, substrate, any of that, you don't want that in your filter or in your pump. So what you're going to do is just put filter material all around it, and you can take that filter out, and also just act as more places for bio or beneficial bacteria to live in, so it'll give it that natural filtering that you see in like a lot of nano tanks with no filters and whatnot. This is kind of the same idea. So I could put a hole so that way I can put my tube through there. That way I get a nice tight seal around the pump. So I'm just going to connect the pump up to the tube again just to make sure everything fits well, and it does. So I'm satisfied with that fit. I mean, it's not perfect, but by the time you get all the rocks and whatnot on there, it should be pretty good. Here's a top view. It's okay if there's gaps. You just want to get the majority of it sealed off. And the wire you can see is a little routed funky. I end up changing that later. But now it's time to add some rocks. So these are the rocks I'm going to be using. These are basalt rocks that I just got from backyard. Just kind of like landscaping rocks. Nothing really fancy about them. I actually just got one big one and broke it apart with a sledgehammer. And I'm going to start building them up to make the waterfall effect. So when using backyard rocks, you want to make sure you rinse them off multiple times, especially with hot water. Hot water is going to be beneficial because it'll help kill any bad bacteria if you use really hot water. Lukewarm water, not so much. You're hoping that it just kind of rinses it off. But hot water is really what you want to use if you can. So my footage actually died here. And I got it all built up. And I forgot to test the flow of my water, of my vacuum. This is something really important you should do before you even start aquascaping. So I put some water in the bottom so that way the pump isn't trying to pump air, because trying to pump air is not good. As you can see, I kind of dialed the flow back down. It was like spraying out all the way across the tank, and that's no good. So on my pump there is this little slider that I can adjust the flow. As you'll see, that's what it was doing earlier, and that's not ideal for our water flow. So I'm just trying to get the right flow of what I wanted to look like coming off the rocks. And I feel like that looks pretty good. If I were to come off a flat rock like that, I feel like I would be happy with that. So you would definitely want to make sure you don't make the same mistake I did and dial in your pump flow before you get all your tank aquascaped, so that way you don't have to tear it apart like I did. Alright, so I'm just gonna unplug the pump here. This is just, I'm satisfied with the flow. I'm gonna try and put all the filter material back how it was, and then I'll start building up my scape again. And you don't have to use basalt rocks. There are a lot of aquarium rocks. This is just what I was doing. I was trying to do a cheaper aquascape, and this is how I did this. So I'm just going to start with the biggest rocks that I have on the bottom. It just makes it easier for me to build a base with the bigger rocks rather than smaller rocks and having to play Jenga with them. You can just put a couple big ones in there, and it'll help build your scape up pretty quick and pretty steep as well. So now you want to be careful when you're putting in your rocks not to scratch your glass or crack your glass. You want to be really careful against that glass. And I'm just going to fit the rocks just how I feel like they want to be fit. There is a pretty big gap behind the rocks, but that's okay. We'll end up plugging that off later. And you want to make sure you have all sorts of different types of rocks, big, small, even like gravel is good for covering up super glue, which you'll see later in the video. So I'm just going to try and stick rocks wherever I can with the least amount of gap as possible. In this one, I do for my waterfall, since we are making a waterfall, I am going to have the rock stick out the top a little bit, and that's where the waterfall will actually be at. So you can see the rock is actually sticking out the top, and this is how I wanted it to be. If you want to run a lid, you probably don't want rock sticking out the top. You can see the waterfall looked pretty good. Now it's time to add some substrate. So this is the Fuel Bio substrate. It's very good stuff. I'm not going to add very much. As you notice, I still have water in there from when I was testing the pump. I should have taken this out, but I didn't. Rookie mistake. But I'm just gonna spread out my substrate, try and fill in all the holes. I mean, not to fill them all in, but ideally you want to fill them all in. So I'm just gonna push in the substrate into the little holes, into the nook and crannies. And it is a little harder to work with since it is soaking wet. But you also want to make kind of a sloped effect towards the back, and that'll kind of give you a depth of field. I guess not depth of field, but perception of depth. And that's what I'm doing. So now I've drained out the water. Smart move by me. And I added some more substrate down in the front, and you can see the foam layer is visible a little bit. That's fine. And I'm just gonna add little bits of substrate. I don't want to add too much because it's easier to add more than it is to take away. And you just keep packing it down in the holes. And I'm also going to kind of blend in the rocks. So the rocks will have a little bit of a buried effect look to them. And this will kind of make the rocks look a little more natural. Make everything flow together rather than it just the rocks like standing out and being out of place. So you can see the difference between the wet substrate and the dry substrate. The dry substrate just flows a lot easier. It's easier to get that natural look, rather with wet substrate you're going to get a lot more of the hard edges that you don't really want normally. And it's just going to be a lot better looking if you use dry substrate when you're aquascaping. It also won't stick to the glass, which is really nice. Ideally, you want about 1 to 2 inches of substrate for your plants. And this will just help them root well and grow in the future. Now I'm adding spiderwood. Spiderwood I did end up ordering off Amazon. You can use other woods, but you have to be really cautious of tannins and harmful bacteria that can be introduced in the wood that you grab. So if you're going to use wood, you want to make sure you boil it and rinse it off for multiple days. But what I'm doing with this wood is I kind of want it to spider throughout. So I'm just pushing it in, trying to get it in the nooks and crannies and find pieces that work. And this is kind of what I ended up going with. I ended up adding a few more sticks later on down the way. But I really like the look of the wood, and I like how it sticks out the top a little bit. So now I'm just going to add some smaller pebble rocks, and I'm going to bounce them off of the rocks so that way they fall naturally. It kind of gives it a better look than me just trying to, naturally make them look placed. It actually gives that nice fall and chipped look to them. But if there is a rock placement that I don't like, I will just go back and fix it. So this is a method I've never tried. This is called painting on moss. So what we have here is a little cup of Java moss, and I'm gonna blend it together. So I put a little bit of water in there. You can see there's not much, just enough to cover the moss pretty much. And I'm gonna put it in my blender, and I'm just gonna blend it up really good. And I had to take it off every couple of seconds after blending because not all the pieces were getting blended. It seemed like a lot of them were getting stuck to the walls. So I just take it off, flip it over, and make sure everything gets blended up real well. Now you got this kind of green protein smoothie shake looking thing. I'm just going to take a paintbrush, and you're just going to paint it on every place that you want moss. So the idea is basically you're going to have small moss particles that are all ground up together, and it'll give you the ability to spread your moss over multiple areas rather than just one or two areas like you normally would when you buy a thing of Java moss. So this gives you some nice growth on like your logs, your rocks, anything you can stick moss to, it'll grow. So I painted that on, and now it's time for me to add my plants. So I'm not 100% sure what these plants are. I just ended up ordering like a variety stem pack off Amazon, like a surprise pack. But it looks like one of them is an Anubias. We have one type of Java fern, maybe two types of Java ferns, and some sort of larger Anubias, and maybe a sword of some sort. I'm not 100% sure. What I'm doing, I'm just going to try and separate them into clumps. Just kind of how the plants feel like they should be separated. I'm not forcing, ripping stems apart, just whatever feels natural, that's where they're going to be at. And I'm taking off all the waste, and I'm also rinsing off any gel that is in the roots, and making sure that there's nothing, just roots and plant. You don't want any extras in your plants. You also want to be very careful when doing this, is you don't want to really pull apart the roots. You don't want to break any roots, because that could hurt the plant and cause them to die when you put them in your plant. When you put them in your tank. It's also always easier to start with mini plants rather than just a couple and add more later. If you're going to do a planted tank, it's better just add them all at the same time. Get a whole bunch. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to be more than you think, but it's better just to do it now than it is to do it later. And you want to be careful when pulling out plants out of pots like these, because you can easily just pull out the plant and not the roots, and you're just gonna have a dead plant at that point. But now that we kind of got all the plants separated out into what we want, I'll start adding them into the tank in just a second. So I would highly recommend using tweezers to put these in. It just makes it a lot easier. It's a lot less of a mess. My idea for this tank is I'm going to go with bigger plants in the front and smaller plants in the foreground, so that way they don't really cover up the tank near as much in the front as they do in the back. I want the back to be a pretty heavily planted look, and the front to be also planted, but not so much that you can't see the fish in there. So this is a fern that I think is really cool. Some sort of like wiggle type Java fern. It's a type of Java fern, I'm not 100% of the name. But I really like the look of it, and I kind of wanted that to be my main centerpiece plant. So that's where I put it, right by the wood, and it's going to just grow out of the wood, and it's going to look really good there. So for the long hair grass, this is a carpet plant typically. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to end up separating it into multiple different pieces, and I'm going to plant it in the edge. This is kind of where I want it to spread. And I'm hoping that it'll spread in the front but not grow out of control and not be super big. So this plant, I'm not sure if it'll make it. The roots were hardly developed, but we're gonna try and make sure it survives. And we're gonna put it back in the back where there's a lot of substrate. It's also a pretty big leaf plant, so I feel like it fits pretty good in the back row. Now these plants, I really wanted to put them in the rocks themselves, but it was really hard for me to get substrate in there and put them in the rocks, so I'm hoping that just the moss will cover up the rocks and give the rocks the nice planted look rather than the actual plants. I tried to pour substrate in there, but it just didn't work out, so I ended up moving most of the plants around to be in different locations. As you can see, that one, I really wanted it up there. I thought it would look really cool, but ultimately I just had to stick it down here in the front corner and hope that it will look good there. I didn't want to overplant the back too much. I could have stuck it in the back and probably been fine, but I felt like I already had a good amount of plants back there. So I'm just adding some more substrate to where there were some lower areas and as well as in the rocks. And then I put some strand wrap over the top, and I watered it 1 to 2 times per day and left the strand wrap on for 3 weeks. So after 3 weeks, this is what the tank had looked like. It's coming along very well. I didn't add any water to it, just misted it with like a spray bottle for 3 weeks, and it's turning out pretty well. So now I'm just going to add water and it should be good to go. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a great rest of your day. See ya.